Community at Maple. We're going to go live today talking to Dave Inglis about how to buy back your time at home. This is very relevant to working parents, especially leaders, and trying to find ways to expand your capacity as a family so that you can focus on things like your health and your relationships and your children and things going on at home. Dave, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, happy to, Lauren. Good to be back. I'm glad that we're doing this again. I'm Dave Inglis. I'm the author of Chief Family Officer, a book I have coming out here in May this year. And I run an organization called Threshold. And our whole mission, Lauren, is to help make life help make life at home easier, right?
Yeah.
And we do that through a variety of different work. I work with a ton of couples and couples coaching, leadership teams, but all that centered around, how do we improve life at home?
Which is the perfect alignment with Maple, because Maple's name is actually an acronym for Make All Parents' Lives Easier. So that is, I don't know if you knew that. Yeah, so that is really lovely. We're a household management app and the very best way for parents to stay organized. Let's get into it because we have about 30 minutes here and I want to make sure you have so many great insights and information. I want to make sure we get to it. I want to start first and foremost with probably the most obvious question for listeners, which is how much money does my household need to be bringing in order to be able to afford to buy back help? And if you have any information around that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, as soon as we even just connect with this idea of buying back your time, right? It's so obvious that we're talking about spending money on it.
Yeah.
But I just want to highlight as we kind of talk about this, buying back your time, while it might insinuate spending money, there's some really creative solutions to it. How do you spend your time to become a little more creative and challenge the way that you've been doing things so that you can get more capacity back in your family? But It's a good question, Lauren, like how much money should you be bringing in? What could a threshold look like? Instead of maybe highlighting a specific amount of money that you should be bringing in, because in my opinion, Lauren, it doesn't matter the amount of money that you earn. You can always be thinking about how you trade your money to buy back your time. Dan Martell, a really, really great entrepreneur and coach, highlights that there's 3 different kind of trades that we can do with our money, Lauren. And I loved learning this from him. A lot of us are very familiar with trading our time to make money or trading our money to make more money, i.e. through investing or other types of opportunities. But there's this third trade of spending our time, our money to buy back our time that is just, I would say, an underdeveloped or underpracticed idea that I think each of us has an opportunity to be thinking through. So a way that I've come to learn to think about the amount of money that you earn and how that could play into this picture is by a really simple calculation. And again, I want to give credit where it's due. I learned this from Dan Martell, Lauren. If you take your gross family income, so let's imagine that you and I are together and you make $100K a year, I make $100K a year, simple math. You take your gross family income and divide it by 8,000. It's a really, really quick equation. And that'll give you the approximate amount of money that you could be spending on a per hour basis to buy back some of your time. So those who are listening are probably wondering, like, where does this number come from? Well, if you were to think about it, generally there's about 2,000 hours that we work every single year, right? And if we were to take your gross amount of money that your family made and you divide it by 2,000, all we're really calculating there is the average hourly wage that your family earns.
Right.
By dividing it by 8,000, all we're doing is taking the total amount of hours that you worked, that 2,000, and cutting it into a quarter. So really what we're trying to figure out is what is 25% of your hourly wage? Because if I'm trying to incentivize or invite a leader to think about spending their money to buy back their time, it has to make sense. And if you're spending 1 hour of your time to buy back 1 hour of your time, it's kind of a net zero outcome, right? And so by thinking about it through this lens of what is your 25% of your family's hourly wage, it allows you to identify an amount of money that you could start being creative with. And why I think that's such an important starting spot is because, for example, with the numbers I gave you, $200,000 family income, if you divide it by 8,000, you're at $25 an hour. So now you can start asking yourselves, okay, how might we get all of our laundry done and get all of our meals done and spend $25 an hour to be able to do that? What are some of the ways that we could get that done? And to your point, for some families, that might be $10 an hour. For other families, it might be in excess of $25, $50 an hour. But just being able to identify what that is gives you a constraint, which is so important rather than problem solving.
Yeah, and I think that number, $25, is a really fair market value for someone to come in and be your household manager or help you with the cleaning or the childcare. My husband and I both obviously work very hard full time,
Mhm.
and we recently felt like we were just drowning. And so we sat down and we decided the same way that we bring someone in to help with maintaining the yard, we
Yeah.
needed to bring someone in to help maintain the inside of our home because it was sort of falling apart. And if our household is not operating smoothly, the kids' routine falls apart, our routine falls apart. We can't find X, Y, and Z in the morning, and it just sets us up for a bad way throughout the week. So we hired someone to come in and really help us with meal prep. So she chops veggies, fruits, makes it really easy to grab and put lunches together. And she also helps us with decluttering the house and sort of resetting us just for a couple hours each week. Makes a huge difference. And I love that you're giving sort of this formula to parents to help sit down and kind of calculate what can we afford, and maybe we can take away here and add there for X amount of time just to help get us through even just a rough patch.
Well, that's such a good point, right? Like when you're starting to think about the idea of buying back your time, it does not need to be a long-term commitment. It
Yeah,
can really be for a season or for a moment, or as we connected a number of months ago, when your partner's traveling, right? Like you and your
that's
partner went away
right.
for 2 weeks. It's like there's opportunities to have intermittent support.
Yes.
And I think one's ability to be able to do that is just so reflective of how adaptable we are, which I think is such an important skill to have, not just at work right now, but obviously at home too. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and so a question for you that I would have, Lauren, is when you spent that money and you made a
Yeah.
decision with your partner to do that, could you describe to us what your energy was like kind of day to day around the house before that help and how
Oh,
that impacted your energy, like personally, just for Lauren?
yeah. Yeah. Well, so we're in a very unique scenario. I work at a company that really is striving to help parents and households create 50-50 at home, whatever that looks like for you. In my own household, my husband gets up at 4:45 in the morning
Mhm,
and he starts work at 5 a.m.
mhm.
And I get up with the kids around 6:30, 6 sometimes, and I get them dressed and I get them ready for school. I get their lunches packed, and then my husband comes up to kiss them on the top of the head, and then he goes back to work and I walk them to the bus stop. Sometimes if he is has the time, he will walk to the bus stop with us. And then he's right back in his office and he works until about 5:30, 6 p.m. So his day is incredibly long, and he is a VP at a big company, and he has a very large team, and they're across multiple continents. And so he's on and he can't step away. So I've really taken the role, and I'm very lucky because Maple has family flex policies that allow parents to sort of have flexible schedules.
Yeah.
So I've sort of taken on, and I hate to use this term, but a default parent role. And
Mhm.
that's what it is in our house right now. It's not forever, but it certainly is this time period. And so before I had support, I felt really resentful. And I also felt, especially in the mornings, very like chaotic. It was too much. I was overwhelmed. I was snapping at my kids, and it just wasn't setting us up for a successful day. And so we sat down and we really worked out what would be the most helpful. And for me, it was I need to be able to put lunches together in like 5 minutes and
Mhm.
not spend a lot of time chopping veggies. And so that was very helpful to have someone come in on Sunday afternoons and really prep our fridge for the week. I mean,
Yeah.
it is fast, it is easy, it is lovely. She also declutters when I walk around my space and there's just stuff everywhere. It really mentally makes me feel overwhelmed. So having her here to really make sure that we have systems in place and we're using those systems is so helpful. So just having her come 5 hours a week has completely transformed our everyday. And, because my husband is at the computer all day, he pitches in and he gets things done like setting up automatic payments and he emails for our family when, emails between school go back and forth. So I really take on the hands-on stuff in person and he
Love
really
that.
takes on our digital life. And that's what works for us.
Hmm.
So yeah, I don't, what do you guys do in your household?
Well, if I could just to go back to my question, Lauren, around like how it makes you feel, I think that's such an
Yeah.
important element around why making these types of investments or spending the time to get creative in different ways of
Yeah.
doing it. Because to your point, you're able to hire somebody to come in, which I think is a great use of your money because it's clearly doing things that are, like you said, creating this feeling of resentment. But there's also the
Yeah.
option of being able to ask a loved one or a retired parent or a neighbor who's looking for things as well to be able to give in or give back, right? So
Yeah.
I just wanted to just highlight that, in the purpose of business, a lot of times when we talk about buying back our time, the objective of that, right, is to be able to increase our capacity to work on things that are higher value to the business.
Yeah.
But in parenting and home life, it's just a touch different. I think
Yeah.
it's very fair for the objective for us to spend that money is maybe sure to give you some more time back in your day to work on your business or what have you. But the climate of the home and the climate of your relationship with your partner is
Yeah.
so important. I would say it's the prerequisite of everything else, right?
Yeah, I
Like the
agree.
tone and the experience of the home sets up everything and creates the container for your interactions and ultimately your relationship together, right?
Yeah.
So I just love hearing that that's had such a big impact on yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
More importantly,
And
the energy that you have.
and I think you're right. We would love to be able to have our parents come in and help us, but we don't live within distance of that being an option.
Mhm.
Most of our parents are out of state, and we don't have really neighbors who are in a position to help us. So this
Yeah,
was the scenario that worked for us that we could come up with. But I have a lot of friends who have grandparents who are able to pick up the kids a couple times a week, or they drop off meals and they're able to pitch in. And I think that's such a lovely thing to be able to do to really help set that household up for having sort of infrastructure for support. So I think that's a good example of a way that households who maybe don't have the income where they can spend money to buy back their time can get more time back. Getting creative like that. It's a
mhm,
good
mhm.
example. What do you guys do to help buy back time?
So it's a good question. For us, I think the place to start, Lauren, it's nice the intention of buying back your time, but it's like, what are you specifically trying to fire yourself from?
Yeah,
Right. I think that's a really important place to start as a family. So I
I
remember
like that. Fire
for
yourself.
yeah, because
I
there's so
like
many
that.
jobs, there's so many jobs to be done. There's no
Yeah,
shortage of them. And I think that's a really important element going back to my point around making these investments to influence your energy, not just your capacity to make more money, right? Or to show up at work. For Jen and I, we sat down and I remember a really thoughtful question we sat with one day over a glass of wine was, what is quietly sabotaging our best time and our best energy together?
I love that.
And the question's really intentional, like quietly sabotaging. To your point, it's
Yeah,
like 5 minutes trying to clean up the kitchen after I drop the kids off, before I jump into meetings. Like
that's
that's the
right.
make or break between Jen and I having a chance to be like, hey, I love you, have a great day. Or hey, yeah, yeah, see you later, right? Like it's totally
Yes.
different in those
Yes.
moments. And so when we sat down with that question, it was, gosh, driving our kids to practice. I love going to soccer games, but when you
Yes.
have soccer 5 days a week, going to
That's
every
right.
single one of them is one of those that zapped our energy. Picking up the kids from school, love dropping them off, but picking them up. A good example of one that would kind of quietly sabotage our energy in key moments. And even after picking the kids up from school, instead of just like getting into life with them, we would often do the pickup, stop by the grocery store, get a whole bunch of stuff. And you and I both know like Costco isn't exactly a playground or an
You
environment
can,
for kids to go into. So we started looking at like all these different jobs we were doing
yeah.
that were getting in the way of us experiencing more joy and bringing more the type of experience that we're looking to have with our kids and with each other, right? So that's kind of
Yeah.
the place to start. To answer your question, what we do, we went through that list so exhaustively where
I
we
love
realized
that.
it wasn't just one job, there was a series of jobs.
Yes.
And so what we've decided to do was to bring in au pairs to live with our family. Now, the
Yeah.
way we got to that was is we both run our own businesses, but when we had William, our third child, both Jen and I, Lauren, decided to pull back a little bit on work so that we could really be present for those first 1,000 days of his life. Which meant
Mm,
that, like full transparency, we weren't earning the same amount of money that we were used to.
yeah. Yeah.
And so all we had when we kind of calculated on a monthly basis, what would our buyback rate be? we came to about like $1,000 a month. And whether that was like daycare or babysitters or, you know, Uber Eats or Instacart, we kind of looked at this and we said, we have $1,000 a month. What could we spend it on? Yeah. And I think this is a good place to, you know, once you understand what those jobs to be done might be, the power of a how might we question. And this is a really important step I want to highlight for those listening, Lauren. Like when you and your partner can sit down and say, well, how might we? It's a really great way to kind of reframe your problems into a space for you to start to come up with several different ideas. So for Jen and I, we said, how might we spend $1,000 a month to have more time with each other and more quality time with the kids? And we came up with 7 or 8 different ideas. We talked about Instacart. We talked about, like we said, aftercare, all these pieces, hiring drivers to help with the kids. And then we discovered au pairs. And it was like, oh my gosh, we could bring somebody over to live with our family from Europe. They could learn English. We could expand our family. And they could actually be intimately as a part of the day-to-day to help with all of these things and to be really adaptable. So that's what we do as a family. I'll say it's been like a progression where we kind of realize all these different jobs. To most question, we have a really good question coming in here on LinkedIn, Lauren. What insights or platforms do you use to find this type of help? In Canada, care.com. Care.com is a wonderful tool that you can use that provides you very different types of care and support. So to your point, Lauren, meal prep. Care.com, you can find people who just do meal prep, right? Childcare, same thing. So that's a great platform that we've used. And in addition to just starting to openly talk about this in our community, because what I find amazing is the more you talk about this, the more people put up their hand and say, well, I love cooking. I'd love to help. I'm looking at starting my own small food business. Like how could I maybe get involved with your family? What would that look like? So I think platforms like care.com are great. In addition to talking about it, sharing and asking, who do you know that's even solved this problem well, to come up with ideas you didn't even know were possible.
Yeah, we love care.com. They're definitely a leader in the space. We also work with Bambino, so they're last minute childcare. Winnie is a really good algorithm for you to go on and try to find childcare as well. I think there's a lot of options in the childcare space. I know at Maple, we really sat down. We're a team of parents who were trying to figure out how do we make life easier. And one of the things the team kept coming up with was, you know, small trips to the grocery store can suck up a lot of your time. Trying to work together to pull together a list for grocery shopping can suck up a lot of your communication time back and forth. So how do we create a hub that is the central place for you to have all of your information as a family? And then how do we create sort of systems to make it faster to work together? And one of them was, what if we bring on Instacart as a partner so that you can have your shopping list and just check out automatically? So I think, you know, there is a lot of software options to help you make life quicker, easier, finding solutions. You just have to kind of do the research to find the companies.
Yeah, totally. And I think one of the biggest challenge for a lot of families is they just don't have the time to even talk about this.
Yeah.
Right? So to me, it was funny. I was away earlier this week with a leadership team, Lauren, and we were talking about the family base camp. You and I talked about this back in November.
Yep.
And one of the questions came up is, everything's pretty good. Like we don't have any big conflicts. So what would we cover if we have that space with each other? Like what would we even talk about? And I was like,
yes,
exactly this. Like now you have time to ask questions like, what part of you do you feel like I don't see? What a great question for you and your partner, Lauren, to be able to talk about, because there's so many things that you're doing that he doesn't see, and there's stuff that he's doing that you don't see. And if we can talk about those openly and start to ask ourselves, what would we fire ourselves from? What is sabotaging our sense of joy in this home? We can use date nights or family base camps. Like this is a conversation that you can table. And I think it's a great reason to come together, and truthfully, a little bit more exciting than talking shop or gossip, right? Like dinner. So even just bringing this as a question to your next date night could be a huge value add, and perhaps open up a conversation that will help you both maybe see what's possible.
Yeah. So for parents, and I think this is a really good follow-up question. For parents who are currently in that situation where they feel so underwater and they don't know where to start, is that what you recommend as a starting place? That just sort of that sit at date night, have a glass of wine, and just start talking about what is it that you're doing that you don't think I see? What is quietly sabotaging our time together?
Yeah, exactly. Like if that's how you feel, reality is if we were to pull up your calendar, you probably don't even have space today or tomorrow or this week. So I always say, like, always throw a conversation out at least 2 weeks because it gives your partner a chance to start to think about it yourself. And the reality is we can typically go in our calendars and see some space 2 or 3 weeks out. So say this is something that you want to go and talk about, that you do feel overwhelmed, right, and underwater, and that you'd like to have a conversation around those things. Because ultimately, understanding what is it that we want to fire ourselves from is the first step in that process, right? And even if you can get clear on just that, it will allow and ultimately plant a seed for both you and your partner to start to think creatively around how you might go and solve a problem like that, right? But ultimately, I think being underwater is one form of resistance, right? Of like, how do you get started? Because there's just so much on the go. But I would say another thing that's really important to talk about too, Lauren, is what would you be worried about if you had something else or something else help you get this job done? I've noticed that a lot of times when it comes to asking for help or even trusting tools like Instacart, right? We all have these worries that sit underneath the surface that are really these unseen obstacles get in the way of us even giving ourselves a chance to experiment with something. I use Instacart as an example for this all the time. I brought it up with one of my dear friends, Mark, around the corner here, Lauren, and he goes, well, they're not going to pick very good produce. It's all going to look like shit. Like they're going to get all the worst stuff.
I hear that all the time. Yeah.
Right. I asked him, like, well, what experience do you have that's taught you that? Well, actually, I don't have any experience around that. Oh, okay. So wouldn't it make sense for us to maybe experiment with Instacart for a week or two and to see if it actually solves the problem?
Yeah.
Like that's the big thing when it comes to buying back your time that I want to encourage people to really maybe take from our conversation, Lauren, is like experiment with some stuff.
Yes.
See if it actually works. You're not committing to it forever, but if you don't like cutting up veggies and making meals, well, bring somebody in or find a solution for a week or two and give it a shot.
Yes. And reading between the lines here, I also think sometimes you have to be okay with letting go. And whether that someone's going to do it a little differently than the way I do it, or maybe it's not at the exact quality or the bar is, maybe I'm setting the bar really high. Can I let go a little bit here or there? Which is a hard thing to do. I mean, especially as a mom, I have a really hard time letting go of certain things. And I don't like the way that they do this or do that. And I don't want to let that task go. But for my family's benefit, for my own mental health, I have to learn how to let go of that thing.
Yeah, certainly. And I love Liam's point here. I'm just looking in the chat. Like people's preconceived notions are just that, notions, not proven hypotheses. What a great point, right? So I agree with you, Lauren. And being able to experiment is just such an important part of this process at the end of the day.
Yeah. Do you have some examples of leaders who have effectively bought back their time and like just some real life examples?
Yeah, for sure. So by way of like sharing some examples with you, I'd also love to highlight, just going back to our point a moment ago of these like preconceived notions. When you have like fears around doing things, it's really important to understand like the essence of motivation. Motivation is a reason to act, right? Or a reason to do something. And I think ultimately that's a big part of this. If you're feeling that resistance, is like, is your reason big enough to actually let go of the thing that is important to you, or to allow somebody else to come into it? And a way that's really good to help somebody think through that is something called a future conditional thought, Lauren. And this is just on my mind. That's why I thought I would share this.
Yeah.
So let's imagine that you're not having good quality time with your partner, and that's the thing that you're kind of sacrificing to do all these other things, right? Or you're not able to get into a really important creative project that's there. A future conditional thought, instead of having to convince yourself to let go of the task and overcome this fear of like it not being done right, because again, that's something has to feel right emotionally before it makes sense logically. Like it has to feel right to send yourself, your kids, to spend time with other people.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel right. It doesn't matter how much it costs. It doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter what they're going to do. So it has to feel right first, right? And so a future conditional thought is, how would you feel if 3 years from now, you still didn't have any quality time with your partner? Or how would you feel with 6 months from now, your creative project wasn't anywhere further than it is now? It's a future conditional thought. So, well, I'd be really frustrated around that. Or how would you feel if all of a sudden you had more capacity and every single day after work, you were able to spend quality time with your kids? How would you feel if you never had to go to the grocery store again? How would you feel if you didn't have to cut the veggies, you could just cook the food? It's a future conditional thought, and bring people to the emotional state that they're going to be in after they try with something, right?
Yeah.
But to your point around some examples, let's just get back to that. I would say there's 3 different kind of examples that come to mind. There are some families where they just don't have a lot of extra capital or resources, right? And some of the biggest changes that I've seen there, some real life examples, is just being able to find the courage to ask for help. And so in those examples, to your point, you don't have family around you, but many people do, and they are underutilizing it because of their own fears of what it means to ask for help or wanting to, be perceived as somebody that's really independent. I've also seen, I'll just use the Instacart example again, right? That's a great example of being able to buy back your time. For us, to your point about the short little trips every single week to the grocery store, our family probably makes 4 or 5 of them. They're all at least for an hour and a half.
That's
so you add that up, you're 10 hours. And if you go back to the calculation I gave to you earlier, 10 hours, $250 every single week to help you with your grocery shopping. Like, could I buy back 10 hours of my time? If you look at the way Instacart works, like 100%, you're able to go and do that.
And it costs like $15.
Absolutely. I was working with another gal up in Quebec not too long ago, whose partner, unfortunately, was going through a really challenging phase of chemotherapy. To your point earlier of like, sometimes it's for a moment, sometimes it's for a very long period of time.
Yes.
So she was traveling a lot for work, and even being able to lean on some of the wash fold services that are available in our community. It's like nobody likes doing, well, maybe it's unfair. Most people really don't like doing laundry, let alone folding it, putting it away. So to be able to use a service like that, right, is such a great example of it. And then at the highest level, a friend of mine, Mike Brown, out of Colorado, is a great example of somebody who has gone so far to hire a house manager.
Yes.
And at the best level, what this looks like is you have a playbook for your home.
That's right.
Right? And we've talked about before the value of Maple as a home for this playbook to exist, right?
Yes.
Where you can have checklists to seasonally take care of things. You can have weekly to-dos, and it can all get broken down into the simplest of steps. Like, I know that Mike likes a certain type of gum in his car. I know that he likes certain types of drinks in his fridge. And it's all those like small little things that he would have to put time into to be able to create an environment that brings out his best, where he's able to now bring in a house manager to work part-time, I think 25, 30 hours a week for their family, to when he goes to work, comes in and does the full sweep of the home and goes through the checklist to make sure everything's stocked and to make sure that everything is done to their liking. So that's a great example of somebody who's been able to overcome that internal resistance of, I don't want to let go of these things, and is really starting to benefit from the level of support and the amount of time that he can get back as a result.
I love that. I think those are really good examples. And I just wanted to comment really quick because Liam made a comment that the kids love checking the boxes off of the Maple shopping list. So I think that's pretty cute. And I love that you did that together, because I think that's another really creative solution to buying back your time, that maybe there's a way to turn some mundane tasks into connected moments with you and your family. So you have to be really intentional. Yeah, you have to be really intentional to create that sort of experience. But I will say, if I go to the grocery store just with one of my kids, because if I take both, they will start fighting. But if I take one and leave one with my husband, we can turn it almost into a fun experience together. And I let him pick out, ice cream that we can have at home. And he helps me think of, ideas for lunches for himself this week. And it's a chance to connect. So if you don't have a ton of money to be able to spend on buying back time, I think that's a really great point that Liam made, that he turned this shopping trip to Publix into time to connect with his child, which is really cool.
100%, right? And there's so many creative parents out there who, again, like, you could really kind of gamify that, right?
Yeah.
different ways and have some fun. And I think like at the core of this, the real rate limiting step here for working parents, busy parents to really get value from this conversation, I think it's not like, how can I buy back my time? What are the different ways of doing it? Like there are so many great tools, most of them of which are on your smartphone, like Instacart or these really simple tools that we can use.
That's right.
The really important step is have you created space to talk about this?
Yes. Yes.
Are you clear as a family on the same page? Like, what is the shit that we do that depletes our sense of joy and that we would happily fire ourselves from? And just start small and just start talking about it in this way where then rather than talking about all the time, how do we get everything done? Who's going to take Tom to practice and who's going to go to the grocery store? Instead of just talking about getting things done, create some space and start talking about how do we get things done in a better way?
Yes.
That really is like the essence of, I think, what I want to invite people to take away from our conversation, Lauren, is like, that's the conversation that you're probably not having.
Yes. And I love that you were very intentional about once you figure out this is our budget or these are our resources, what might it look like if we did X, Y, and Z, and coming up with sort of a multi-pronged approach to this, which I think is really smart.
You know, there was a really fun exercise as we're talking about this. It's coming to mind for me, Lauren. I remember about a decade ago, I would take a lot of innovation teams away to do like 2 or 3 day sprints. And inevitably, they would come to this point where they were able to work with a customer to get really clear on a problem they want to go and solve. But then I was like, well, how do we go and do it? And you know, anybody who has exposure to problem solving knows how important divergent thinking is. Divergent thinking is where you come up with lots of different options before you converge into one that can be done successfully, that meets the conditions or circumstances that you're in. But the importance of going wide and divergent, right? And in design thinking, that's where this question, like, how might we, is so important. And once you frame the question, like, how might we never cook food again in this home and still eat at your level? As an example, there's a great exercise that Google Ventures team does called Crazy Eights.
Oh, I don't know about this.
Is once you have your problem, your how might you question, sit down and put a timer on for 8 minutes, and you have 1 minute to come up with 8 different ideas. So you have 8 minutes, and just you and your partner sitting down, and even if the first one you just sit there and you draw a blank, but then the second minute timer comes up and you think, oh, I could do this or I could do that. Okay, perfect. Now come up with a third one and a fourth one and a fifth one. What you start to realize over time is when you go through that process of divergent thinking, it's often 2 or 3 of those that could rumble together to come up with a solution you would never even think about. And so just really practically speaking, right? Like once you kind of get clear on what it is you want to fire yourself from, use the tools we use in business sometimes to take a very thoughtful approach to problem solving. And I think coming up with several options is way better than trying to come up with the perfect one, because it's a combination of them that's often really going to be the unique one that can make a difference for your family.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. And I just like, wow, this whole conversation, there have been so many good insights and practical strategies that people can take away with them and really implement inside their home. I can't thank you enough for coming on and talking to me today.
My pleasure, Lauren. Thank you for the opportunity. And like I said, I think more than ever, it's like, what are the important conversations that we're not having at home? And there's so many of them, right? But this is a really important one, especially for a lot of your users who are that working parents, tons on the go. And I think the more we can start to think about how we not just, you know, get everything done, but how we actually can kind of restructure the way we get things done to give us the time that we need to do things that we love, the better. So I'm hopeful that we were able to plant some seeds for conversations in a lot of homes today.
Super smart way to really intentionally design your life. I really, really thank you for it. Dave Inglis, everyone, thank you so much. And we'll do this again soon, and we'll put it out there for everyone to attend. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.